Welcome to my Inkscape course about making graphs. This course will not cover the basics of using Inkscape, but the basics of creating charts, graphs, for example bar charts, pie charts, donut charts. We will talk about radar plots, stacked graphs, area graphs, and I'm going to show you how all of this can be done in Inkscape. If you don't know Inkscape at all, it's a free vector program. You'll find a link to it in the description below. There you can download it for free and then use it directly. It's open source. But if you've never used it, this may not be the best course for you to try directly. Instead, I've made a beginner course about it. Just go to my channel homepage. Here under free full courses you should find it, or under graphic design you will find my Inkscape playlist. Click on it, and the course is the first video in the playlist. And there are also more than 400 videos that explain the basics of this program. So work your way through that course first if you're totally new to Inkscape. But if you're not and you want to check out how to make graphs, this course is for you. In general, there are two ways to create basically all of the graphs imaginable. The first one is the manual way. For example, here a simple bar chart. You can create that using rectangles and then give that different colors. But there is also a second way. Under extensions, you go to render, and there you should find the nice charts. Click on it and this menu will pop up. It's a pretty useful tool that's inbuilt by default. So when you've just downloaded Inkscape, this should be inbuilt. And here you can create a couple of charts automatically by just adding the data right here, for example, via a manual direct input. Then we click on live preview and we should see it. Takes a little bit of time to load, but here's our bar chart, just rendered by this Nice Charts plugin. Don't forget to click on apply, and then you can close this menu. Oh, we've got our bars here and a little bit of information, and you can see this works as well. There are some limitations to using Nice Charts. There are some problems with using the manual way. I'm going to use both in this tutorial. And whenever one method is the easier one, the quicker one, I'm going to mention that specifically and only use that. Sometimes we're even going to use a combination of both. As I've said, this Nice Chart is inbuilt by default, so you should have it. No need to pay for anything here. So why not use it if it makes your life a little bit easier? As always with these courses, it's a good idea to not just watch it, but also do what you see here. So whenever I close a chapter, I would recommend that you try to recreate the chart, maybe even play a little bit around with it and create your own ones so that you get a little bit of practice under your belt. And now once you're ready, we're going to start with the first real example in the next chapter. Let us start with our first simple diagram. We're going to create a Venn diagram. What you want to do for it is to use the ellipse tool, hold Ctrl and then go to a 45-degree angle. This will give you a perfect circle. Color can be adjusted right here with a left click, and this is the fill that you can adjust. When you want to adjust the stroke, you simply hold Shift and click on the colors. The X is for no color. You can also see that up here on the top right. You can double click on the stroke and fill and then adjust it, or find the same menu under Object, Fill and Stroke. As I've said, for the stroke, we've used the X, and for the fill, you can adjust the color right here. Don't worry too much for now about the colors. What we basically need is only a circle in our first step. Then I press Ctrl D to copy it and I drag it to the right holding Ctrl. I select both, and it's a good idea to not give it a fill but a stroke. Once more, click on the X to get rid of the fill and hold Shift and click on the color to give it a stroke. I want to copy one of these circles yet again. So I have a top circle. And now let me position that a little bit better. I'll put this right here holding Ctrl. Then I select the two at the bottom and I want to group it. You can press Ctrl G or go to Object and Group. Third one I want to position on top, but I want to have it perfectly positioned. And to do that, we'll select it all. Go to Object, Align and Distribute. And now I simply set it under Align to vertical axis. So if this is out of the axis, I click click here, it jumps to the center. We're good right here. Let's move on. The next step is to ungroup the two at the bottom. So we select them, we can press Shift Ctrl G, or we'll go to Object and Ungroup. Then I select all three, go to Path and use Combine. Now I create a rectangle. I'll give it a fill color, and then I make it bigger than my diagram. I put it to the bottom in a stacking order, and I want to get rid of the stroke, so hold Shift, click on the X. I select everything, and then I go to Path and use Division. I can now select the rectangle and press the Delete key. And what we have are all of these segments of the overlaps, and we can color them now. Let me pick maybe a bluish color set, and I give that the bluish fill tones here. And now all that we need to add are text elements. What can we make this? Let me just make that social media. So use Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. I simply press Ctrl D to copy these text elements, and when I size them up and down I hold Ctrl. So now let me think about the overlaps. What can we add here? Obviously all of them are social media, so I put that in the center. Twitter and Facebook are text-based, so you can't really find text on YouTube. What's the similarity between Twitter and YouTube? Well, not video, you can add that on Facebook as well. I use Twitter and YouTube, but I don't use Facebook, so let me make that social media I use. And the similarities between YouTube and Facebook, what could that be? And both of them don't have Elon Musk, so let me add that here. So again, you only can do that manually. The nice charts, they don't offer that option for Venn diagrams, but you can see it's pretty easy once you've done that a couple of times. You may have gotten lost a little bit under the path options where you have to group, ungroup, combine and use the division. Just go slowly over this chapter again if that was too fast and do it step by step. But as I've said, once you've done that 4 or 5 times, it becomes second nature and it's fairly easy and quickly done. The second diagram is what's called an Euler diagram. It's a little bit different from the Venn diagram, but it basically works the same way. We create a circle with the ellipse tool while holding Control and going to a 45-degree angle. Let me go down to a different color palette. Not green. Let me use this pinkish one to start there. And now I create more circles. And I pick a different shade of this pink every time. Once we've got all the circles that we need for our diagram, There are multiple ways to create this typical Euler effect. First up, we'll select them all. First up, we want to check the stacking order. So these smaller ones, they have to be on top. Therefore, I select the one here on the left. I want this to be on top. So I pick one of the stacking options here to bring it up. Once we've got that, we'll go to Object Fill and Stroke, and here you can pick, for example, the different blending modes, but I like to use the opacity and bring it to around 50%. But for some color combinations, the blending modes are totally fine. I've sadly picked the bad one. But here you can see overlay and difference. They give you the overlaps in different colors. As I've said, I like to use the opacity that works on every color. Once that is done, we'll add our text elements to each using the type tool. But be aware that it stores the last style. So we've reduced the opacity, therefore the opacity for the text element is also reduced. Then we go back and I align it to the left. And now I double click down here to open Fill and Stroke. And I bring back 100% opacity to have it fully black. And now it's the same game. You just position that correctly. When you resize it, hold Ctrl to keep the aspect ratio. Then press Ctrl D to copy it, reposition it, and then press T for the type tool. And you can access these elements and then give them different names. For example, if we wanted to create an Euler diagram of Britain, it would look a little bit like this. We need one of these isles now. Let me use, for example, the Isle of Man. And there you go. With every chapter, I would advise you to recreate that to get some practice and then come back for the next chapter. The next one that I want to show you is what's called a funnel chart. Some people also call that pyramid diagram or pyramid chart. Make sure that you can see your rulers. If you can't, press Ctrl R and they should be blended in. Then you can drag one of these guidelines out of the rulers, position that somewhat to the middle. Now we use the pen tool. Just left click and hold Ctrl so that it snaps into a correct angle. And then close your shape with left clicks. We'll take care of the color later on. For now, we'll just create the objects. Start with the next one. Same game, but I give that a different color. As I've said, don't worry about the colors for now. I'll just want to make sure that we can see different objects. Now we'll create this angle, and to do that we'll simply release Ctrl. Still close the shape, and then move on with the next one. And one more. For vertical and horizontal lines, I'll hold Ctrl again. For the angle, I'll release it. Now we're good here. Let us take care of the colors now. I selected all and I still have the opacity lowered. So let me bring that back to 100. And now I simply use one of these reddish color palettes. Maybe something like this. We go with this one, we select it all, then press Ctrl D and hold Ctrl when you drag the copy out of there. And now you just have to use one of these top functions for flipping. There's horizontal and vertical. And what we need is right here, the horizontal flipping. Left click on it. And then it's mirrored. If you can't connect it directly, deselect it and select it again. And then the snapping should work. As you can see here, we don't need the guideline anymore. I can left click and drag it back into the rulers. And now we can already work with it, or we can connect these shapes if you want to. To do that, best way is to left click and hold shift, click on both of these elements and then use path union. If you try to select it, it's a little bit trickier. I think holding shift and then left clicking on both is the easier way. Then we continue with the other shapes. And now we'll add our text elements. Let me make that about sales, something like this. I need to give it a black fill color. So press Ctrl A while it's active to have it all selected. And let me make sales the bottom one. And we'll start with the leads here on top. So 100% leads. And then I'll reposition it to the center. There are some smart guides that help you. Press Ctrl D to copy it. Then T for the type tool, left click on it, Ctrl A to select it all, and then change it, for example, to calls in the next level, and then proceed until your entire chart, your diagram is filled. In the end, you can select it all and then group it, pressing Ctrl G if you want to. This is how you can create these funnel charts or pyramid diagrams in Inkscape. Now let us start by creating bar charts. We want to use the nice charts under render first. This menu should pop up. First up is the data option. And then drop down, pick the bar chart. And if you check the live preview, you should already see the default example that's inbuilt in Inkscape. It uses fruits, so apples, bananas, oranges, pears. Let's move on to labels first, and here you can set the font, color and size. And as long as the live preview is still checked, you can see the adjustments in real time. Font color is a hex code. One more thing to add here though is when you start adjusting, for example, the font, let me delete the first letter here. You can see it tries to render it right away because the live preview is still checked. Whenever you make bigger adjustments, it's a good idea to uncheck it, make the adjustment, and then check the live preview again. If, for example, from a sans serif to a serif font, or bringing the sans serif font back. Values, if you check that, you will see these values that are given under data. So 4 pears, 10 oranges, for example. The charts, there are a little bit more details. You can flip this 90 degrees by checking the box for drawing horizontally. We want to stay vertical for now. Bar length and bar width can be adjusted here. This obviously only has an impact when we have bar charts. The next value, pi radius, only works when we have a pie chart. The bar offset is the distance between the bars. Stroke width, and then more offset between chart and labels or chart and chart title. This simply adjusts the distance between all of these different elements that are rendered automatically here. The color scheme can be adjusted below. First up, we have a drop down with inbuilt sets. You can always add your custom colors here via hex codes, but you can also reverse it and add a drop shadow. These are just a couple of styling options. Let us stick to the defaults. In most examples, I want to use that. Now let's get back to the data. And here, as I've said, live preview is checked. So if I delete the first number here, you'll get a warning message. So it's always a good idea when you make these big adjustments to uncheck the live preview and only check it again when you've made your adjustments. You can add more data sets with a comma, and then, for example, let me make that watermelons, then colon, and I make it 7. I check the live preview again, and here you can see our 5th value now. It's rendered automatically and given a different color. Before you can actually use it, don't forget to click on apply, and then you can see all of these elements are individual elements. So you may want to select it all and press Ctrl G to group it. As always, try to create your own bar chart using this nice charts option. Next up, let me show you how we can create horizontal bar charts and stacked bar charts. Again, we'll use our nice charts, our render extension. We've added our watermelons to the default. And you can see in the chart type there is a stacked bar chart option. Just select it, check the live preview. And now this is stacked. It only gives you one column, so you have to change the values for each. Let me uncheck the live preview. I switch up our values. Check the live preview again. Keep in mind it's going to get rendered in the same position. That can be a little bit annoying when it comes to selecting it afterwards. But hold Control when you do in this case. And now I delete these text elements. We don't need them 2 times. And now I would use the type tool and add, for example, 2023 and 2024 to our bars. Ctrl D to copy this element, always on Control to keep it in the same horizontal position. And now I reposition this second stack bar, and there you go. So this would be the way I would do it. And now if you render a new one, you can add your third bar. As I've said, it's a good idea to, once you've got it applied, to reposition that. And when you now render a new one, it's not going to get rendered on top of this in the same position. Okay, let me delete this and we'll go over the process for horizontal bars. I've already spoiled that a little bit in the last chapter. We'll select bar chart in the chart type. Let me check the live preview, and under charts you can simply check draw horizontally. And there you have your horizontal bars. Same goes for the stack bars. So let me drag this over here. Make sure that draw horizontally is checked. And now I use for type the stack bar chart. And there you go. So this works just like with the horizontal bars. And if we wanted to have more, I'll render this again after I've repositioned the first one. Now I use the type tool and I add, let's say once again, 2023 and 24. As always, I would recommend that you try to recreate that, create at least one horizontal bar chart and at least one stacked bar chart. Now let us quickly go over how we can create this manually. All that it takes is the rectangle tool, and then you have to define basic values. Let's say for width 15, I've got it set to millimeters, and the height, my base unit is going to be 10. So every value in the data that I've got will be multiplied by 10 to have the height of our bars. Let's just say this is our first unit, and then the second I create with Ctrl D, hold Ctrl when I drag it to the right. And now our second data set would have a value of 5. So I simply multiply the height that we've got, which was 10, our base unit, times 5. And now let's say we have one that has 7.5. To achieve that, Ctrl D to copy this bar. Make sure to reselect the rectangle tool. And then you can see right here, we have to get back to our basic unit first, which was 10. So you can divide this by 5 or just type in 10 if you've memorized it. And then times 7.5 for a new data set, which in our case would be 75. Drag it upwards, and there you go. Now you can change the fill color with a simple left click. Now use the type tool, and let me stick to fruits. I make this apples, pears. Let me check the color. We're actually good here. Final one, I make it bananas. If you want to make this not a vertical but a horizontal bar chart, you can now simply select the bars, make sure not to select the text, then left click on it again, and now you can rotate it, holding Ctrl makes it snap. Reposition your text elements, and I've got the apples 2 times, let me delete it. But there you go, we now have a horizontal bar chart. Same goes for the stacked ones. You can simply reposition them on top of one another like this, rotate them back to have a vertical stacked bar chart. One more thing that I want to add is I didn't talk much about the custom colors on the charts right here. So you can add them for all of these values if you want to use specific colors, but it's actually easier, I would say, to not do that inside of this menu. Let me just pick a blue color scheme. I apply. And now you can see all of these are individual elements. So we can pick our colors now and simply change them with a left click. And I think that's way easier than typing in hex codes here. Same goes for the text elements, obviously. You can select them and give them a different color as well. What you should use is up to you. Sometimes it's quicker to do it manually. Sometimes it's way easier to use the nice charts. Sometimes a combination of both works best. And in general, it's totally up to you. You can see both ways work. Let me show you how to create grouped bar charts. It's a combination of using the nice charts and using a manual adjustment. First up, select the chart type bar, and we uncheck it. We want to start with a horizontal. I've got 4 values here. If we use that right away as our first data set, we will run into a problem. Let's just say we have these fruits available and we also want to have a group bar for the fruits eaten. So all of this should be lower. You can see the issue that we've got is this bar has the same size. We have 4 pears eaten, but we had 10 available. So the second bar should be way smaller. Therefore, that's not the way to do it. Instead, you want to define a basic unit. And this one is what you want to keep. Let me make this 10. And best way to do it is obviously to turn off the live preview for now, or you get this warning message. So let me just call it basic and I make it 10. And this is what you want to keep for both data sets. So this is the first one. This is our fruits eaten. 3, 1, 2, and 4. I apply it, and now I want to have fruits available. So all of these numbers will be bigger, but I keep the basic still set to 10. Let me delete this one, we don't need it. This is our fruits eaten, I put it to the left. And now I render fruits available again. I apply. And now we just have to rearrange this. So the basic, it was just there so that we have the same size for both of our graphs, but I can delete it now. So the first group of bars are the pears, second oranges, third bananas, and fourth apples. Once we've rearranged that, let me give that different colors. And now I hold Control when I use the rectangle tool here to create a square. Press Ctrl D to copy it. As I've said, the first one, the bigger ones, are the fruits available. The smaller ones are the fruits eaten. And if you want to have that not vertically but horizontally, you can just select it all, left click on it again, and then you can rotate it holding Control. And this is how I would create these group bar charts in Inkscape. As always, try to do it yourself. You don't have to use fruits, but make sure that you create at least one example of your own. Next up, I want to show you a divergent bar chart, and we use the same trick that we've used in the last chapter. So in addition to our data set, we also define a basic, and we give this a value of 10. And we want to keep that for both of our bar charts. Just make sure this is set as the chart type. We'll stick to our fruits here, and we once again want to do it for fruits available, fruits eaten, something like this. Let's stick to vertical for now. We can rotate it afterwards anyway. Don't forget to confirm via apply. Now let me reposition this a little bit to the left. We use our nice charts again. And now we'll take care of the fruits eaten, so we go down with the values. But again, as I've mentioned, we'll keep the basic and we keep its value. So basic 10 stays. We'll confirm again using apply. Now we can close it and we want to get rid of the basic, we don't need it anymore. But due to this little trick, we now have the same basic unit in both of these charts and we can connect them just like this. Position them at the center. Once you've got it connected, you can just select it, left click on it again, hold Control when you rotate it, and this would be a horizontal divergent bar chart. So when you've got these two values, in our simple case, fruits available, fruits eaten, you can create that with this method. Our final bar chart chapter, I'll show you how to make all of these bar charts 3D. Unfortunately, there isn't an option yet under chart type in the nice charts, so we'll have to do it manually. I'll get rid of our basic, we don't need it for this example, and we'll start with the default here. I'll apply it. Now we'll take the first bar for apples, and we want to create an angle here. I'm going to use guides for that. You can simply drag them out of your rulers. If you can't see the rulers, press Ctrl R. They should be blended in. When you now double click on your guides, the guide menu pops up and here you can set the angle. It goes clockwise, so if you want to have your angle to the right, we need to use negative values. Let me use -20 degrees. We want to position that at the bottom right, the top right and the top left. So we need 3 for our 3D effect. And don't worry, we only have to set that up one time for one bar and then we can copy that. Afterwards we'll use the pen tool. But if you've never copied these guides, it's easier to double click on it and there you will find a duplicate option. And this is what we want to do now. So I double click here and then we use duplicate and I can drag a duplicate out of there. They all have the same angle of -20 degrees. You can zoom in and out holding Control using the mouse wheel. So starting point, now we use the pen tool. Make sure you click on this first node, then make sure to stay on the smart guide, hold Control when you go up until you hit the smart guide, left click again, go to the node and then close your shape. So this is the right hand side, same goes for the top. When you go from left to right, hold Control here until you've hit the smart guide, then close your shape. Now we just select a color combination that works. I want to make it lighter on the front, a bit darker on the side, and darkest at the top. Something like this. As I've said, we only have to add that or create that once. We can now press Ctrl D on these side elements to drag copies out of there, and our smart guides help us. And it should snap to the correct position, but we'll have to adjust the size. We use the nodes tool for that. Select the top 2 nodes in this case, drag it downwards and hold Control while you do. When you zoom in, it should help you finding the snapping point. Same goes for the top element. We'll select it, Ctrl D, drag it out of there, reposition it, and this should fit perfectly right away. Select the lighter color for the front. Then we'll go to the next bar, select the side, Ctrl D, reposition it until it snaps at the bottom right. Use the nodes tool, select the top two nodes, make it bigger until it snaps at the top right. Select the top part, Ctrl D yet again, reposition it until it snaps. One more bar to go. Now we'll have to reposition our text elements. We can simply hover over our guides here and then press the delete key to get rid of them. If you want to have this as a horizontal, just select it, click on it again, rotate it while holding Control. And you can also flip the 3D effect with the functions up here at the top. So if you want to have the 3D effect on a different side, you can just flip it. But just make sure when you flip it that you reposition the names for the bars, because the orientation is completely flipped. So peers are not on the right anymore if you flip it, they're on the left, so reposition the text then. But this is the process that I would recommend to create 3D bars in Inkscape. As always, do it yourself. And in the next chapter we will start creating pie charts. Let us dive right into creating pie charts. We use the nice charts first, and I'll show you how to render this. It's fairly simple. We use the default values yet again, so these fruits. I've got it set to bar chart, and I check the live preview. And now you can use the same for pie charts, just change the chart type here. There's also a percentage pie chart. So in this case, it takes the values, the absolute values, and sees them as percentages. Let us first use this one, labels, still the same. We can add the values right here. And if I change this to the percentages, you can now see it's not absolute anymore. It's now 3%, 1%, 4%, 6%. We can change a couple of things under charts. Obviously now draw horizontally doesn't have an impact anymore. Bar length, bar width, bar offset, all of that doesn't do anything anymore, but the pie radius is important because it's for the size. Let me cut it in half. You don't want to have it that big. You can still add some offsets here and change the color. It all works as it has worked with the bar charts. We also have a drop shadow here. And if I apply, you can see all of that renders specific individual elements. So I can drag this out of here, and it always creates this background grayish circle. So if you don't want to have that, select it and then delete it, pressing the delete key. When you reposition these elements, be careful that you hit the right spot. So you may have to zoom in a little bit and then do that correctly. Text elements are also individual elements, so you can drag them around and reposition them. Try to create a pie chart of your own using the nice charts, and in the next chapter I'll show you how you can do that manually. Now let us create the pie charts manually. In some cases that's easier, some cases this is way harder. You want to use the ellipse tool, go to a 45-degree angle and hold Control. This gives you a perfect circle. And you can see when you have different tools activated, you will not find these corner points that we need, but when you have the ellipse tool active, you will see a circle and 2 squares. And this is what we need. We need the circle when you left click and then drag. You can see how this adjusts the circle, and you want to go to the outside because the outside gives you this pie chart. The inside gives you a straight line as a connector. So be on the outside of the circle and then left click drag, go around counterclockwise, and this gives you the segments that you need for a pie chart. You can now, as long as it is selected, press Ctrl D to copy it, and then you can adjust the next segment. And if I select this, drag it out of there, you can see we have 2 segments. You can see when I deselect and reselect the ellipse tool, the last style is being stored. So when you have these pie charts and you want to get back to a full circle, this is what gets stored. So you will always have the last segment as your new element then. It's a good idea to start with a bigger element and then go smaller with each. So Ctrl D to copy and then make it smaller each time. This would be the way to create it. But we have a problem now. We want to start with a full circle. So I can redrag this circle and you can see I didn't hit the 45-degree angle perfectly. So let me do it again. You can also see I didn't hit the circle here perfectly. So I don't have 360 degrees. Hitting it manually is a little bit harder to do. Or we can simply add this right here for the endpoint. And here's the start point. Just make the start 0 and the endpoint 360. And this should close your circle. And there's also this option right here. So if I make this a pie chart again, and now I click here, it closed the circle. You can be sure now it's 360 degrees. And as I've said, this way you want to start with your pie chart. So then press Ctrl D, create your segments, the different colors, and always stay on the outside to have these segments. So this is the basic approach, but you certainly ask yourself, how can we do that so that we have perfect segments? So we usually have values that we want to have represented in our pie charts. We can do that using the start and end angles right here. As I've mentioned, it goes from 0 to 360. So if I make that, let's say 20 degrees. So we know that 360 degrees is 100%. Therefore, we now have to find out what is 20 degrees. And it's a simple math problem. But still, let me use a calculator here. What I type in is simply 100 divided by 360. And then times 20, and this leaves us with 5.56%. So this little segment would be around almost 6%. Let's say we had 43% in our data set. We'll start with 43 divided by 100. And then times 360. And this gives us 155 degrees. So we copy our segment, Ctrl D, and then we go to the end position 155. But we have a little bit of a problem here. You can see this first segment overlaps with the first one, and we don't want to have that. So we'll have to get back to the ellipse tool, and here we have to add the 20 degrees from the first segment to the start and also to the end. So we go from 20 to 175, which is still 155 degrees as an angle. But now the start point is adjusted, and this is how you do it. Just for practice, let me show you one more set. Let's say 13.5% for your data set. Therefore, we use 13.5 divided by 100. And then times 360. So this would be around 49%. And doing the recording, I saw that I actually calculated times 365. That was my mistake, sorry. We need to use 360, and then it's close to 49 degrees. For the adjustment, we'll do it the same now. We'll copy it, Ctrl D. We'll start at 175, and then we end at 175 plus 49. And this gives us the angle that we need. We just have to stack this now using this element to the bottom. And here you can see this would be now the 13.5% segment. So this is the way you can create that manually. As I've said, sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder. It's up to you what you want to choose. Let us create a donut chart. We'll start the same way that we started with pie charts. Let me render it. I use a regular pie chart. I apply. I'll reposition the text a little bit. We don't want to have it in our way when we select this element later on. Use the ellipse tool, go to the center position, left click drag, and then hold Ctrl and Shift. Go to a 45-degree angle. This ensures you've got a perfect circle. And by holding Shift, this circle is created from the position where you've clicked on, so our center. And then you press Ctrl D 3 times. So we need 4 circles because we have 4 segments. We have oranges, pears, apples, bananas. So whatever data set you've got, count these segments. In my case, as I've said, it's 4. Therefore, I need 4 center circles. Now I click on the center circle, hold Shift and click on one segment. Afterwards we'll go to Path and use Difference. We do that now for every segment. So we click on the center circle, hold Shift, then click on a new segment, go to Path and then Difference. And this cuts out these parts out of every single segment, and we have our donut chart. You can then reposition your text, recolor these segments if you want to, so this is still possible afterwards. The same obviously works for manually created pie charts. So if you just use the ellipse, I will create one from scratch here. So we simply press Ctrl D here and copy these segments, reposition the circle, recolor it. I'll just go quickly over this, 3 segments. Now use the ellipse tool, go to the center, hold Ctrl and Shift, go to a 45-degree angle. And don't forget, this is a segment now. So what we need to do is to create a circle, holding Ctrl and Shift, then clicking on this element up here to make it a full circle. I have 3 segments, therefore I have to press Ctrl D 2 times while the center circle is active. Then hold Shift when you click on the center circle and a segment, Path and Difference. You can see how that works. What now if you have a lot of data pairs? So not just 4, let's say you have 100. It would be very tedious to create the center circle 100 times. So there is a quicker way when you have lots of these segments. We'll start yet again with the default here. We position the text elements. Then we'll use the ellipse tool, go to the center, hold Ctrl and Shift while we left click drag. But this time we'll make this circle as big as our chart. It should snap. Then press Ctrl D. Let me recolor this. So we've copied this circle. Use the selection tool and then hold Ctrl and Shift and size it down. Now hold Shift and select these two circles. Afterwards, path and difference. This gives us a donut and the chart is behind it. Now select it all by left click drag, right click, and then set clip right here. And this will clip our chart to this donut and give us a cutout. So when you have lots of segments, this is the quicker way to do it. And by the way, you can still recolor these segments afterwards. Both of these methods are valid as you've seen. Pick the one that's quicker or just pick the one that you like more. Let us create half pie and half donut charts. Actually quite common. We'll render yet again a default, so nothing special. And we'll start with chart type pie. And this gives you this full circle. To make this a half pie chart, we'll have to add all of the values. In our case, it's 30 times 2 plus 120 plus 180 makes it 360. And then we add a fictitious value, let me call it basic, and I make that 360, so the sum of all of the other values. And it's a good idea to paste it in the first position, add the comma, then check the live preview. And this is what we want. So half of our pie chart is now fictitious and we can simply delete this. But that was our basic. Also delete the background. And there's a half pie chart. So all that you have to do is to sum it all up and then add a fictitious data pair with this sum. You can also create donut charts like this. So we create our center circle again. Using the ellipse tool, we hold Ctrl and Shift at the center position, make it maybe as big as this. Then count your segments. We have 4, therefore I have to press Ctrl D 3 times on the center circle to have 3 copies and the original, which makes it 4. And then I hold Shift and select the center circle and the segments one by one and use path difference. And now we have our half donut chart. All of this also works on pie charts that we've created manually. But you have to take care of your values a little bit. Let us start with a full circle. And you can see, I drag this over here, this is actually the 360 position. And the other one is 360, then minus whatever value your segment has. So let me say it's 20. And just as a mathematical explanation, you need to double that now. So 20 in this regard actually means 40%, because we only have a 180 circle and not a 360. So everything's doubled now. And then for the next segment, you start at 340, and then we add 340 minus, let's say 53. And this creates your next segment. And this is how you go about it. This would create a half pie chart manually, and then you can add the same process to create the half donut chart. Personally, I think it's way easier to use the nice charts. You don't have to do much calculation, just add this basic element, which is half of the pie, and then you're good to go. One more thing, again, when you have lots of data pairs, you can use the clipping mask method that I've shown you in the last chapter. So let me render this again. And we'll assume that we don't have 4 values, but like 100. Make sure that you add your basic so that it covers half of the pie. Then delete it. Then use the ellipse tool, go to center, hold Shift and Control, make it as big as your chart. Then press Ctrl D on it, resize it. Give it a different color as well. Hold Shift, select both, path difference. Make sure to bring it to the top here in the stacking order. Then select your donut and the chart, not the text elements. Right click and set clip. Finally, let us turn our pie charts into a 3D chart. We will render the basic pie chart first. But let me make the bananas a little bit smaller so that we have more to work with. I'll just make them 100, and that should be good. Now I want to reposition the text, get it out of the way first. Just make sure you memorize which segment was for what text. Then I shift click, so hold shift and left click on all of these segments and get rid of the background, we don't need it. Now I select everything again and I transform it. So I simply left click drag without holding any keys here, because I want to have an ellipse and not a circle. Select it again and press Ctrl D to copy it, and hold Ctrl when you drag this copy upwards a little bit. Something like this should be fine. And you want to have your ruler, so press Ctrl R if you can't see them. Drag guides out of there and position them where all of these segments are. I need 4. So here's the next one. That's why I resized the banana. And here's another one. Alright, now we use the pen tool, but before let me recolor that. Top one I want to have darker, bottom one lighter, but I want to have more contrast, so I use red on blue here. Now I use the pen tool, and I go over this segment first. I've got my guides to help me, and I close my shape. So this is what you should have. And it should have the same color as the bottom element. So the bottom is lighter. I picked the same color, it was this one. And now I use the stacking order right here, step by step, left click on it until it is behind the top element right here. And this makes this segment appear to be 3D. Let's go to the next one. I want to have better contrast here. Use an orange brownish color. And then a lighter color for this one. We have to use the pen tool again, go over the segments, close the shape. It has to have the same color as the bottom one yet again, so this lighter orange. And now stacking order, step by step, left click on it until it is behind the top element. We have one more to go here, let me make that yellowish. Once more, we need the pen tool. Our guides help us. We'll close the shape. And then we use the stacking order. We don't need to change that for the last one because of the angle. And now I hover over these guides and press the delete key to get rid of them. And you can see it now looks like we have a 3D pie chart. But we have to restack the text because it is behind the pie chart. So when it is selected, click on the left stacking option right here to put it to the top. And then you can place it on top of these segments. As always, good idea to recreate it. Have some patience with the pen tool, but I think it's not that hard when you've done it a couple of times. And that's about it for pie charts. In the next chapter we will start creating some graph charts. Now let us move on with line graphs. To create one we need a rectangle, because we want to use the function plotter. Make sure that it only has a stroke, so hold shift and click on a color, and get rid of the fill by clicking on the X without holding any keys. You can adjust on the fill and stroke the stroke width. And it's actually important because this also determines the thickness of your graph. And here in a stroke paint, you can also set the color. Make sure it's selected. Then go to extensions, render, and there is something called function plotter. Looks a little bit intimidating at first, but it's actually quite easy to use. Under use, it is explained. Under functions, if you're familiar with Python, you get some explanations, and there's a help button that gives you basically an about. What's important for us is the range and sampling. Below the function we can determine that, but be aware that it doesn't work properly with, for example, x squared. So you have to write x times x instead, and only then it will render. your graph and the function. Make the first derivative x, and then the function x times x. The start value for x and y is just the horizontal scale. So if you go very high, you can see that here. It's going to calculate more of these values. I'll set it to -3 and 3 for our function, that's fine. And then we have y value for the bottom and for the top. So in our case we don't have bottom values, but I'll make that -1 anyway, so that we have this typical coordinate system. The number of samples is for how many calculations are done. So how many iterations your function is going to have. It becomes more obvious when I use a different function. You can also use polar coordinates if you need that. You don't need it here, and there's isotropic scaling. We'll leave that unchecked for now. You just want to create a basic function. Let me uncheck the live preview, and I set my function to x times x in brackets, but this time minus, and then plus maybe 5. Let me check. And I can even go higher. Let me make that +8. And you can see now these iterations, they have made our function a little bit choppy. And if I go higher, this disappears. So let me set that to 50, and you can see that very clearly. It looks almost like a step because of the iterations. And if we make that 500, our function will be eased out here. Click on apply, and then you can use this. If you don't need a perfect line graph, you just need something that qualitatively displays what you want to have displayed, you can simply draw a line with the pen tool, left click and hold Ctrl when you go upwards, then press Ctrl D to copy it. Click on it again with the selection tool, then you can rotate it, hold Ctrl when you do. And then use the pen tool to create your function, left click, drag for curves, and then deselect that. And if you want to add a second function now, you can easily do that. Let me use a straight line here. You can still recolor this. So if you just need, as I've said, a qualitative display, this might be actually easier. If you want to use the function plotter to create multiple graphs, so multiple functions inside of the same diagram, what you need to do, uncheck this box for remove rectangle. And then apply. And now we still have our rectangle. I can drag it out of there. I can use it to render the next function. Let me use maybe x squared. And this time I remove the rectangle. And now I can overlay this, and it has the same size. Keep in mind, this is not a group, this is a path. So if you want to recolor this, you would recolor also the coordinate system. You don't want that. Let me show you. You can select this, but if you try to ungroup, this won't have any impact. So on the object ungroup, it says at the bottom no group. What you actually need to do is to go to path and then break it apart. So right here, break apart. And now all of these lines are individual elements. You can drag the coordinate system out of there and recolor your graph. The coordinate system will stay in black. Let us create an area graph, and this is basically a simple graph that has a fill. So we'll start with our function plotter. We need a rectangle for that first. We have a stroke, no fill. Let me check this. I have x squared here, and I want to have a fill below. So make that minus. and I go to +7, we can work with that. We have now a couple of ways to fill this, and there is an inbuilt bucket fill tool. It's kind of like the live bucket fill that you may be familiar with from Illustrator and Photoshop. It uses the last dial, so in our case only a stroke. Let me give it a fill, no stroke, and now I left click on the area that I want to have filled. You can see this works, and if you change the color, it's still active. So if you want to color a different area with a different color, you need to deselect this first, reselect the tool, left click on the area, and then change the color. But the problem with this tool is I think it's a little bit buggy, and you can see here it leaves a halo in many ways. Here on the edge you can even see it created a curve. It's not my favorite tool. Let me delete this. I think it's better to select the entire graph, then go to Path and Break Apart. So this has detached our function here from the graph. And I press Ctrl D on it so that I have it 2 times. And for this one, I give it a fill. And this already looks perfect on the edges. I get rid of the stroke. Now I use the stacking order to put it behind my graph. Like this. And now we only have to deal with the bottom part. We can use, for example, a rectangle. Let me make that greenish so that we can see properly. Follow your axis right here and then hold Shift, click on red elements. What we've got selected are these 2 elements. And then you just go to Path and use Difference. And it's going to cut the bottom part. And now we have, I would say, perfect results. We don't have curves, we don't have any glitches here. So this is the better way to do it, I think. And this can be done for any graph or any function. Usually these area graphs, they don't use complex functions. It's usually a very simple diagram, and it may be better to create that from scratch manually. Let me create the axis first using the pen tool, and then you have this typical spike function, so it goes up, down, stuff like this. And then when you've arrived at the end, you hold Control, go down, keep holding Control, go to the left, close your shape, and now you can give that a fill. Just make sure that you resize your graph now a little bit. So the axis is a little bit too small, so I have to put this to the bottom in the stacking order, and then I can select the x-axis and reposition that, make it a bit bigger. So if you only need something like this, do it manually, it's quickly done. But if you have a complex function, try to use the plotter and use the break apart and difference method that I've shown you before. Very often area graphs are stacked. We can create them the manual way easily with the same method that we've used in the last chapter. Let me create the coordinate system here. I'll make sure that both have the same stroke width. So let me set this to millimeters, and then I make this 1 millimeter. Once that is done, we use the pen tool to create our first area. It's a good idea to start with the biggest. So in your diagram, the biggest one should be drawn first. Saves you a little bit of time when it comes to stacking them. Give it a fill, get rid of the stroke, and then make sure that this is set behind your axis. So use the stacking functions up here to put them a little bit below. Then create the next one. give it a different fill color. Once again, check the stacking order when it comes to the X and Y axis. Let us create one more. And there you go. This is the way that I would do it. As I've said, usually these stacked area graphs, they have very simple functions, so I can create that easily with the pen tool. Next up, let me show you how we can create candlestick bars. It's a good idea to use the page grid for that. You will find it under View. Just check the box, and then you can use the pen tool and it snaps so that we can easily create our coordinate system first. And we give it a black color. I'll hold Shift and click on this black color swatch. Use the pen tool again. And now I create a straight line first. This is going to be our basic unit, so our basic candlestick. Then use the rectangle tool. Need a fill for that and no stroke. And usually they have horizontal lines on top and bottom as well. I create one and then I press Ctrl D to copy it and position the copy to the bottom. So this is our basic unit. And you can now copy this, so select it, Ctrl D, and then use the grid to resize it. And this way the dimensions will fit. So work with the grid. You only have to create one candlestick and then copy it as often as you need it and resize it. So again, under View, you'll find the grid. And we need the general snapping enabled. And the snapping for the grids can be found down here. By the way, this icon next to the arrow, this is the general snapping. So if you left click on it, snapping will be off. If you click on it, it will be on. Let me show you a couple of scatter graphs. This is easily done using the grid yet again. There are a couple of variations when it comes to this graph, but usually they use circles. It needs to be a full circle. I held Control when I dragged it, 45-degree angle as always, so that we have a perfect circle. And I believe it's called a scatter bubble or bubble graph when they have different sizes and different colors like this. So this is a variation of the simple scatter graph where you only have circles of the same size. And there's also another variation, which is the connected scatter graph. And this uses the same circles. So let me delete the bigger ones. And then you connect these circles using the pen tool. Just make sure to give this line a stroke and no fill. Let me use the same color here. What was it? should be this one. And again, for these graphs, it's a good idea to use the grid on the view and make sure that your snapping is enabled. Just keep the default for the rest here, but make sure that general snapping is enabled and the grid. Next up, I'll show you how to create a radar plot graph. We'll use once again the grid, so check the box on the view. Now we use the star polygon tool. Left click on it and then you should find the polygon option right here. You can make that 5 or 6 corners, whatever you need, depending on how many parameters your graph should focus on. I'll make that 6, so we have a hexagon. Just left click and drag, don't hold any keys, and it should snap to the grid. When you reposition that, just make sure that you zoom in carefully and then check if one of these nodes is actually positioned on the grid like this. But once that is done, you can now press Ctrl D on these hexagons and then hold Shift and Ctrl and resize them. I go 2 steps upwards here every time on the grid. You can see this also resizes the stroke width, so we need to fix that under Object, Fill and Stroke. Just go to Stroke Style, set it to an absolute unit, for example millimeters, and I make that 1. Under Stroke Paint you can also change the color. Let us go with plain black, so hold Shift and click on black color swatch. It's also possible to recolor it. Now next up, usually there are some connectors, basically like a grid inside of these. We can easily create that using the pen tool. Just go to all corners and connect them with a left click. Make sure that it has the same color, so in our case black. And then finally go to the center with the ellipse tool, left click drag while holding Ctrl and Shift. And this is usually the setup for these basic radar plots. Now we'll create our data sets using the pen tool. First up, I'll create a simple shape and check my color. Let us use a reddish color, no stroke. I delete it, and now we go to these points in the grid of our radar plot. So each corner of the pentagon is a parameter. And here's our data set, and just make sure it's selected and use the stacking order to put it to the bottom. This would be one way to organize that. Let me add 2 more. And you can now use the stacking options here to reposition that. But there's also a different way to do that. Just simply left click on all 3 while holding Shift to have them all selected. Bring them to the front. And then go to Object, Fill and Stroke. And we go down with the opacity to around 50%. So this is also done in many radar plot graphs that I've seen. Now we use the type tool, add our parameters here. And we can also create a rectangle for datasets. Just use the eyedropper tool here to sample the color from our graph. I believe the short key is D for it. And as long as your rectangle is selected and you use the dropper tool, it will be recolored automatically. So I can make this dataset 1. Copy this, Ctrl D, and I select the rectangle. Use the dropper tool again on a different dataset. And this is how you can create your legend here. One little detail to add, you can see here on the edges, there's a little bit narrow spike, you could say. It's because of the join. So if you don't want that, select your entire graph. Then go to Object, Fill and Stroke. We need to go to Stroke Style, and I zoom in here. And under Stroke Style you will find the join. Default is middle join, but when you set it to round or bevel, this little spike will disappear. So if you don't want to have that, just make sure to set your join to round or bevel depending on what you want. Again, the grid has helped us quite a lot. Under View, Page Grid, just check the box and it makes your life a little bit easier. Here's another bar chart, but it's a radial bar chart, so I've added it to the other charts category in my video description chapter list. We need a couple of simple formulas here, and then we need to create our first circle. We need a stroke no fill. Let me go to fill and stroke, we need that later on. And we need to adjust the width up here, but be careful, you want to check this icon first. So the width and height are connected, so this lock needs to be closed, and when you set the width to 150, the height will also have 150, that's what we need. And one more thing to add, when you adjust the stroke, this is actually going to resize the width and height of your circle, so this added to it. Be careful, because when we now want to use this, you can see this doesn't have 150 anymore. So what we want to do first is to totally neglect our stroke and focus on 150. Then we press Ctrl D to copy this. So we've got two now of the same size. And the first one on top is still selected. I'll make this 130. Press Ctrl D to copy it, then 110. Then 90 and so forth. Create as many as you have data sets. I think that's enough. And now we select it all and we set our stroke width to an absolute value, maybe millimeters. Let me try 8. Oh, that may be too big. Let me go to 7, but that should be fine. Now we go to Object, Align and Distribute. All circles are still selected and we put it to center right here. And 7 was a good value. If it's still too big for you, you can simply go back to Fill and Stroke and make it 6, for example. Let me find a color palette to work with, maybe this greenish one. Select your circles, hold Shift, and then pick one of these swatches. And that's a good one. We'll start with this. Select the outer one. We know that 360 is 100% and 180 is 50%. So if we type in 180 for the endpoint, we would have 50%. This is easily done in the head. But let's say we have other values. Maybe we'll start with 25%. That is still easily doable in the head. Let me change my colors down here so that we can actually see it. So 25%. We need to divide that by 100, which leaves us with a fourth, or 0.25. And this will be our z value. And now we need to calculate z, so 0.25 times 360 to have our x value for the degree. And this is obviously 90. So if we wanted to display 25% for a circle, we select one of these and just type in 90 here for the endpoint. And this would leave us with a quarter of a circle, therefore 90 degrees. If you just need that qualitatively, you can obviously just drag it here. But if you have specific values that you want to have displayed, let's perform this simple math calculation. Let us, for example, choose, and let me pick something odd. I'll use maybe 11. So 11 divided by 100 would be 0.11. Well, let me actually use a calculator before I miscalculate anything here. So 11 divided by 100, 0.11, this is our z value now. And now we need to calculate 0.11, the z value times 360. And this is 39.6. So 39.6 is our x value. And to display that, we'll select one of our circles. Let me select maybe the smallest one. We activate the ellipse tool, go to the endpoint, make it 39.6. So that's what you have to do for all of your data sets, all of your circles. I'll go quickly over this with a manual adjustment. And you can already see if I go to the inside, this connector vanishes. And this is actually what we want. And there's the second option right here, switch to arc. The first one is the closed shape. So I select the outer one, I activate the ellipse tool and switch to arc, and this makes the connector vanish. Again, this would be my x value, 212. Let us pick a numerical value here, maybe 126, switch to arc. And the final one, we need to switch to arc here as well. And there you go. One more thing that I want to add is select it all and then go to Object, Fill and Stroke. And we need to check under Stroke Style the cap, so this makes it cut off. You can also give it a round cap. And the difference between this butt cap and the square cap is just the positioning. Butt cap ends where the node is, butt cap exceeds a little bit, but it looks basically the same. Just make sure that if you don't want to have a round cap, that it's set to either butt or square, and you can do that under Fill and Stroke. As always, create your legend, sample the color from the circles, and then you're good here. And our final chapter, it's going to be a little bit longer because we're going to create a little bit more of a complex graph. We need the polar grid tool for that. And before I confuse it totally with it, I would advise you to just keep the default, check the live preview, and this should give you enough cells. You can add or subtract sums here. For the divisions, this is the most important adjustment that you can make. Let me go down to 6 maybe for angle divisions. And you can see it leaves you with less, but the defaults, they should be usually enough to create what is called a Sunburst or Nightingale graph. And we're going to adjust it anyway. For us, it's important that we have enough cells. So too few would be a problem, but too many isn't a problem. Next up, we want to have our rulers blended in. Press Ctrl R if you can't see them. And then drag two guides to the center position. So we want them exactly right here. This is our starting place, and Now we use the ellipse tool, go to the center, left click drag and hold Shift and Control. You don't have to be perfect in this step, because we can now resize that anyway. Just make sure that you hit the borders here of these cells. And if I use the stacking order, you can see we've done that correctly. The center position you usually want to leave empty, so it's a good idea to create an ellipse for that as well. So again, I go to the center, left click drag while holding Shift and Control. Let me give that a different color. And now I haven't hit the spot right. So what you need to do now is you have to reposition it without holding any keys. The snapping should help. But be careful, once you've done that, you want to check width and height. They have to have the same value. And in my case, that's not the case. You can see it's 26,447 and 26,448. So I have to resize that once more in each direction on a different zoom level. This should now give us the correct values, and you can see that 26,458 for width and height. So we are in center and the size is a perfect circle. I copied this one in center a couple of times because we need it a lot of times, and then I hold Shift and select this bluish one and the one in center, use path division, and this gives us a cutout. The next step is to use the pen tool, and we want to follow our cells, and we can exceed that here. Important is that we hit the angles correctly, so just follow your polar grid lines. And again, the snapping should help you finding the center of these lines. And when you exceed it, you don't have to be perfect, so inside and outside is not an issue, just make sure the angle is right. It's selected, I hold Shift, and then I select our donut circle. Again, we go to path, but this time we use intersection. And this gives us what we actually want, this little arc. And if we want to create more of them, we need the snapping, but also for object rotation centers. So under other points, object rotation centers must be checked. Then you can click on it again, and this gives you the rotation center. And this now snaps to the center position where our guides are. So right here. This is where we want to be. What you then do is press Ctrl D to copy this arc. Give it a different color. And now if we rotate that, we have our second arc for this level of the chart. Just be careful here with the snapping. Try out different zoom levels if it doesn't snap directly. Let me create two more. In many cases, you won't have the same size for each arc in your diagram, or you don't want to have that. And to achieve that, we'll just have to use the pen tool yet again. Let me bring that to the bottom so that we can see our grid again. I use the pen tool. Once more, I use the center position of these lines. I close my shape. Let me give that a different color. Then I hold Shift and click on the arc. So I have this selected here. I go to Path, Intersection, and now I have a smaller arc. For the final element, I copy this one yet again. Make sure its rotation center is positioned on the center of our guides. Give that a different color. I rotate it, and it doesn't matter that it's bigger, because we're just going to use the stacking order to put it at the bottom. And this way we can be sure that this has the correct size that we need. So for the last one, you can give yourself the luxury of not using the intersection yet again. Just use the stacking order. Now let's go to the next level. Again, we'll start with an ellipse. Make sure it's in center. We resize that. We check width and height. It has the same value. I put it to the bottom. Then I hold Shift, click on the center circle. We've got that copied initially. I use difference on the path, and now we have this donut for the second level. Give that a different color, maybe this one. And now we use the pen tool yet again. Let me use some odd angles here. Just make sure to use this polar grid and the default snapping, and this gives you the right angle. Again, give that a different color, hold Shift, click on our donut of the bigger level. So this one here and our new shape. Then I go to path and use intersection. We have our next arc. Again, double click on it, reposition rotation center. Press Ctrl D, recolor it. Then rotate it. And in many of these diagrams, of these graphs, you can see that not all of these cells are filled. So let me leave a gap here for our next one. Again, I've used Ctrl D, gave that a different color, rotated it, and I leave the gap. And now we can just delete the grid. And delete the center circle. Then we go to Edit, Delete All Guides. And now we use the Type tool to add our descriptions. Maybe I'll make that week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in the outer layer, I'll make that a couple of days. Maybe Monday, Friday, Saturday, something like this. So this is the process that I would recommend. A couple of things to add. Be careful with the stacking order. Might have to reposition that, so use top functions here while the selection is active. And if you want to add a divider in between these cells, you can add a stroke. But number one is, let us go to Object, Fill and Stroke. You have to set it to an absolute value under stroke style. Let me use millimeters. And I'll try one. Oh, that's too thick. Let me go to 0.2 maybe. And then you have to hold Shift and select your text elements, because this was given a stroke as well. And we don't want to have that, so hold Shift, click on the X to get rid of it. And now we have dividers in between the cells. So this is how you would add that. So this concludes our course. I hope it was helpful. Generally, if there are questions, let me know. And if I've forgotten an important graph, let me also know. I might make an additional video about that if I know how it's done. But in general, I hope this course was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.